If you're like me, then the idea of setting boundaries might make you feel a little anxious. People don't like to be told no when they're looking for a yes, and what's more, you don't want to make the people around you feel judged. Or worse, prompt them to feel angry with the new line you've drawn in the sand. But we still hear it over and over again. Boundaries are foundational for maintaining healthy relationships and protecting your overall wellness. This is one of those episodes that I wrote for myself as much as I wrote it for you. I wanted answers. How do I go about setting the boundaries I choose? And of course, how do I set these boundaries with as little backlash as possible? I'm PJ Aubrey, psychology grad, health and wellness coach, and your friendly guide through the tricky terrain of boundary setting. Today, we'll be using science-backed advice and vivid storytelling to address some of boundaries' toughest problems. Stay tuned, folks. It's gonna be good. Hasan, a lean young man in jeans and a cream-colored t-shirt, approached the orangutan enclosure amidst the jungle-esque chirping and hooting of the Kuseng Kalim Zoo. The hairy orange apes ambled about the enclosure, which was draped with vine-like ropes and adorned with various hammocks and tree-nestled platforms. One orangutan dangled on the rebar that encased the habitat, her eyes calmly following Hasan as he jumped the security barricade and walked closer, his phone nestled nearby to record. Hasan opened his arms in a hug. The orangutan, Tina, had other ideas. With the speed of a striking snake, her long, powerful arm flew from behind the bars and snagged Hasan's shirt. No! Hasan leaned back, trying to avoid her other arm and hand-like feet. His voice was absolutely soaked in fear as an onlooker wrapped his arms around Hasan and attempted to help free him. Unfortunately for Hasan, an orangutan is about 7 times stronger than a human. The two men didn't stand a chance. Tina reeled Hasan in with his off-white shirt, then grabbed his leg. Before long, her 2 hands and 1 foot were wrapped around his calf in a vice grip, while Hasan's companions scurried about, tugging Hasan and even kicking Tina half-heartedly in an attempt to break him free. Then Hasan's body went horizontal against the cage, Tina lifting the leg, the onlooker holding the rest of Hasan's weight. If she saw fit, Tina could pull Hasan through the bars, snapping his limbs like twigs to fit him through the small gaps. It would not have been pretty, but Tina didn't do that. For a moment, she did look interested in biting off a few of his toes, but then the novelty of her strange new pet wore off. Tina released Hasan completely intact. Remember that security barricade Hasan jumped? Yup, it was there for a reason. Hasan and Tina got lucky. Hasan had no significant injuries, and Tina didn't face punishments for the terrifying hug she'd given him. Many others aren't so fortunate. There are pages upon pages of news stories detailing a reckless visitor's ineffable desire to approach a dangerous zoo animal. Many come back with fractures and lacerations. Others, like a man who entered a lion's enclosure for a selfie, don't come back at all. The one thing in common in all these stories, there was always a boundary someone had to cross before they were in danger. A fence, a moat, a man-made cliff, or a combination of the 3. On the correct side of the boundary, no one is hurt. On the other side, it's a different story. Of course, the boundaries aren't just for the humans' benefit, but the zoo animals as well. Many of the beasts that attacked their human trespassers were euthanized afterwards. Zoo barriers also prevent the rough handling of animals, the transfer of disease, or overeager guests sharing food that could prove dangerous to the critters. Boundaries help both sides, and both species, remain safe and secure. I have the feeling you know where I'm going with this. In our own lives, the topic of boundary setting may make us feel uncomfortable. I know it does for me. We don't want to hurt any feelings or damage relationships by setting ground rules that could ruffle some feathers. However, a reasonable set of boundaries is critical for both sides of a healthy relationship. A boundary setter is far less likely to feel taken advantage of. They're less likely to feel resentment and burnout with their counterpart, and they're more likely to enjoy a sense of mutual respect. The boundary follower gets some pretty perks as well, They don't have the stress of guessing what's okay and what's not okay in a given relationship. They'll experience a heightened sense of security, less unpleasant relationship friction, and their own share of the mutual respect they've helped create. This doesn't mean boundary setting is easy, or that every companion will weep with gratitude when you lay down a new security barrier. In fact, it can seem that the closer our relationship is with someone, the harder it is to set a boundary without the other feeling hurt or offended. We've all been there. Our kid doesn't exactly like the new dinner table rule, our spouse doesn't appreciate what feels like a callous correction, or a bestie disappears from the face of the earth after you set that new boundary. We're left to worry about the long-term consequences of the boundary we've chosen, and we question if we should have just left it all alone. Take a deep breath. You're still allowed to have a few ground rules when it comes to relationships, and we're going to share some of our best data-backed strategies to smooth the whole process. Ladies and gentlemen, coming up, our best tips and tricks on setting and keeping relationship boundaries the easy way. Hey, if you like what you're hearing on the podcast so far and you want to surround yourself even more with wellness tips, tricks, and stories, we invite you to follow A Survivor's Guide to Health on Facebook. Let's pump a little more positivity into that feed. Goodness knows Facebook could use a few extra good vibes. You can find our Facebook link right in the show notes of this episode. All right, back to the show. It was October 2016 in the London Zoo. Exotic birds chirped, monkeys hooted, guests chatted with each other, the typical din of a day at the zoo. Until an alarm went off. Kumbuka, a silverback gorilla of nearly 7 feet, had escaped his enclosure. Areas were immediately sealed off to prevent the gorilla's movement. Guests were evacuated from the park or quickly redirected into secure buildings. But one man, a zookeeper that had a close relationship with the massive animal, got the shock of his life when he found himself face to face with 410 pounds of sheer nature. Kumbuka was well equipped to dismember the man at his leisure. Thankfully, the zookeeper kept his head. They had a good relationship, and he spoke calmly and encouragingly until he could excuse himself to safer venues. Herein lies our first recommendation for setting boundaries. Just like the zookeeper with Kumbuka, keep it short and sweet. Why sweet? The answer is in our neurons. Humans, like many animals, possess cells in their brain called mirror neurons. These brain cells live up to their name. In a nutshell, they prompt us to mirror the demeanor and behaviors of those we're interacting with. Mirror neurons are one of the reasons we get stressed when we're around someone who's stressed, why we might laugh when we hear other people laughing, and even yawn when we see someone yawning on TV. They're also the reason why, when approaching a tricky topic, it's best to keep it friendly and respectful. Your mood is one of the fastest ways to make or break a conversation, as we learned in our last episode when discussing difficult conversations. Take advantage of those mirror neurons. Give the attitude you want to get back. One strategy for keeping things sweet when boundary setting is to focus on what can be done rather than what shouldn't have been done. For example, if Kumbuka spoke fluent English, the keeper could focus on what could be done by saying, "Hey, let's stay in the enclosure from now on," rather than saying, "Hey, you shouldn't be leaving your enclosure like that." So here we have two phrases. Let's stay in the enclosure, and you shouldn't be leaving your enclosure. The difference between these two phrases is subtle, but powerful. The first phrase focused on a solution. Let's stay in the enclosure from now on. While the second phrase was 100% oriented around the problem. Stay in your enclosure? That's a solution. You shouldn't be leaving your enclosure like that. That's not only problem-focused, but could easily come off as accusatory as well. And once someone feels accused, good luck having a productive conversation. Let's look at a more relatable example than a gorilla. A romantic partner. Perhaps your partner has a bad habit of leaving their dishes in the sink for you to clean up. Rather than focusing on the problem by saying, "I need you to stop leaving your dishes in the sink," Sweeten it up by phrasing it as a solution. Hey, please stick your dishes in the dishwasher when you're done. Notice these positive phrases are also very short. It's generally recommended not to give a longer explanation than needed when setting a boundary. Long reports on why you want something often come across as preachy and judgmental. When it comes to setting boundaries, short and sweet just can't be beat. For our next boundary setting tip, let's return to the story of Kumbuka, the escaped gorilla. With a giant primate on the loose, it's only a matter of time until windows are smashed by gray, meaty fists, and some poor blonde woman is kidnapped to the top of the tallest structure in the zoo, right? Well, turns out Kumbuka didn't care much for destruction and terror. He didn't break a single window or kidnap a single blonde woman. So how did he spend his time on his adventure? He wandered to a nearby area and drank 5 liters of undiluted blackcurrant squash. What's a vacation without a nice beverage? This brings us to our next boundary setting strategy. Acknowledge the attraction of the behavior in question. Here's what this looks like in our dish example. Hey, I know it's a pain in the butt to take care of your dishes, and it's way easier just to put them in the sink, but please go ahead and stick them in the dishwasher. It really makes my life easier when it's time to clean up. That first line about the convenience and the pains of dishwashing acknowledge why your partner does what he or she does when they leave their dishes in the sink. It makes things less confrontational by saying, hey man, I totally get it. It also reduces the temptation for your partner to get defensive and feel the need to explain themselves. You've done the explaining for them, and you've basically told them, it's cool. Let's try something better. For Kumbuka, we could easily see the attraction of his escape. Who doesn't like a relaxing stroll and a nice drink? Now, even when you kept things short and sweet and you've showed empathy for your counterpart, it's important to prepare for some backlash. After all, you can only control what you do and what you say. In the end, you can't control your counterpart's feelings or reactions. If you've carefully selected a boundary, and you truly feel it's worth fighting for, prepare to accept the possibility of some uncomfortable pushback. This is best done before you approach your counterpart to set the boundary, and there's a few ways you can come to terms with the possibility of backlash. 1. Before the boundary setting conversation, envision yourself responding respectfully and compassionately to your partner's most likely responses. 2. Journal about what you'll do if the boundary setting goes sideways. How will you stay calm? How will you respectfully stand your ground in the days to come? And how will you take care of yourself to help manage the stress? 3. Role play with someone you trust. Ideally, you should choose someone who has been on one or both sides of a similar situation to yours, as well as someone who has respect for both you and the person you'll be setting the boundary with. If you can find someone who fits this description, then you've just reduced your chances of getting biased feedback and increased your chances of tapping into the most relevant wisdom. 4. Ground yourself before the boundary setting talk. Try breathing exercises, meditation, or anything that helps you become calm, relaxed, and positive. The zookeepers understood the possibility of backlash when it came to Kumbuka. Not only did they sequester him away from the zoogoers, but they tranquilized him before moving him safely back into his enclosure. If there's any time you want to avoid backlash, it's when you're setting boundaries with a 410-pound gorilla. Luckily, no one was hurt during the Kumbuka escape, and the gorilla lived on with a mean tale to tell to his pack of gorilla ladies. And possibly a bit of a tummy ache from all that undiluted blackcurrant squash. There is one more tip when it comes to setting boundaries, and it happens before you've even articulated what that boundary is. Here's the tip. Don't mistake setting a boundary for someone else as setting a boundary for yourself. What I mean is that often we see boundary setting as telling others what to do, how they're allowed to talk to us, how they're allowed to behave around us, even how they do the dishes. While it's perfectly fine to have a respectful discussion about how others behave, these aren't boundaries we can enforce. We might have a bit of influence over others, but in the end, we can't make someone change anything. and no one likes having someone else try to set their boundaries for them. That being said, you might have noticed that our dish cleaning boundary is incomplete. So far, it's only asking someone else to do something different. In other words, it's an attempt to set a boundary for another person, which doesn't work. Let's give our boundary example one more polish. Hey, I know it's a pain in the butt to take care of your dishes, and it's way easier just to put them in the sink, but please go ahead and stick them in the dishwasher anyway. I'm just going to be cleaning my own dishes from now on, unless you're really in a pinch. Plot twist! That last line, I'm just going to be cleaning my own dishes, is the real boundary setting. The inconvenience of dish doing is out of your control. Whether or not your partner starts putting their dishes away is out of your control. But cleaning your own dishes, and only your own dishes, that's the part where you can actually stick to your guns. I added the unless you're really in a pinch part because that's my version of an olive branch. It's still something that's up to me and my judgment, and it softens the blow. However, that little softening might not be right for you in your situation. You be the judge. Let's look at one other example just to really drive these points home. Say you've got a teenager who's developed a disrespectful streak. I know, super unlikely, but it does happen. You can't talk to me like that sounds like an awesome boundary for you to set. And believe me, it's one I've tried to set for my own teen. But in the end, you can't actually control how your kid speaks to you. Instead of, you can't talk to me like that, let's try again. Hey there, teenager. Listen, I know you're going through a lot and you don't like a lot of the rules around here. However, please be more kind when you're speaking to me. Otherwise, you can't use the car this weekend. Okay, this boundary is closer. You've acknowledged the attraction of the poor behavior. I know you're going through a lot and you don't like the rules around here. You've given your teen a positive alternative to their rude behavior by saying, please be more kind to me. You've also set a boundary in your control, which is that you're not sharing your car with someone who doesn't treat you with respect. Let's polish this boundary one more time to make it shine. Hey there, teenager. I know you're going through a lot, and you don't like a lot of the rules around here. However, I'm asking you to be more kind when you're speaking to me. I do appreciate the respect, and I'd be happy to let you use the car this weekend if I can get that from you. Aha! Now our boundary doesn't sound like a threat, do this or you can't use the car, but a potential reward. Do this and you get to use the car. In the end, your meaning is exactly the same. No respect, no car. But you reduce the odds of your teen rebelling against the feeling of being controlled when you frame it as a reward rather than a punishment. That's a technique I really wish I tried a long time ago. Are these techniques going to pave a perfect resistance-free path for you to skip down on your happy boundary-setting way? Not a chance. Remember the tip we shared on accepting the possibility of friction before you go about setting your boundary. In the end, there's no magic technique that smooths out every bump. But keep practicing. The better you become with these skills, the smoother things will go. For good measure, here's a review of what we covered in this episode. 1. Keep it short and sweet. Rather than emphasizing the problem behavior, focus on solution behaviors. Be respectful and be brief. 2. Let your counterpart know that you can understand the attraction of the decisions they're making. Help them feel like you get it and you're not here to condemn them. 3. Even if you've done everything right, accept the possibility of backlash. Before you even have the boundary setting session, it helps to imagine how you'll handle backlash with grace. Write about it in your journal and/or role play with someone who can empathize with the situation. 4. Before you even set your boundary, make sure it's something within your control and that you're not accidentally trying to set someone else's boundary. Remember, folks, pick your battles wisely. You can't die on every hill, and each relationship requires some give and take. But when the time comes to lay down a security barrier, you can rest easy, knowing you set your boundaries with compassion, and you can stick to your guns with a clean conscience. As this week's episode comes to a close, we'd like to offer our Silver Liners Challenge. This week's challenge is simple. Select one of the strategies we offered and start practicing. You may not even have a boundary that you'd like to set, but these techniques can come in handy in multiple ways. Grounding yourself, focusing on what's in your control, entering conversations with a positive, cooperative attitude. Sign me up, baby! These are all wholesome habits, whether or not you've got a boundary to lay down. Now, for those of you who would like to do more research on boundary setting, we're going to include some resources we found helpful in this episode's description. And hey, while you're in the description, go ahead and click the link to our Facebook page. Follow us to get some pokes of positivity right in your feed. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We're honored to have each and every one of you listening, and we mean it. To wrap things up, let's dive into our cheesy joke of the week. A gorilla escaped from a local zoo, and instead of buying another one, the zoo thought it would be cheaper to hire a man in a gorilla costume. When zoo visitors came to see him, he pounded his chest, grunted, and walked like a gorilla. Beneath the gorilla's cage was a lion's cage. One day, the man in the gorilla suit was running around, grunting and pretending to be a gorilla, when all of a sudden the bottom of his cage broke, and he fell into the lion's den. The man panicked and yelled out, "Help me! Help me!" for fear of his life. The lion approached the man and said, "Shut up! You're gonna get us both fired." Thanks, everyone. We'll see you week after next.